Alien interview by Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy. Chapter 1 My first interview with the alien. Top secret * alien interview audiobook by Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy. Chapter 2. Audiobook * top secret * alien interview. Chapter 9 Part 2. At 8212 before Christ. The Veda or Vedic hymns are a set of religious hymns that were introduced into the societies of Earth. They came forward in spoken tradition, memorized, from generation to generation. The Hymn to the Dawn Child includes an idea called the cycle of the physical universe, the creation, growth, conservation, decay and death or destruction of energy and matter in a space. These cycles produce time. The same set of hymns describes the theory of evolution. Here is a tremendous body of knowledge which contains a great deal of spiritual truth. Unfortunately, it has been incorrectly evaluated by humans and altered with lies and reversals of fact by priests, which are a booby trap to prevent anyone from using the wisdom to discover a way to escape from the prison planet. At 8050 before Christ. Destruction of the Old Empire, home planet government in this galaxy. This was the end of the Old Empire as a political entity in the galaxy. However, the vast size of the Old Empire will take many thousands of years for the domain to conquer completely. The inertia of the political, economic and cultural systems of the Old Empire will remain in place for some time to come. However, remnants of the Old Empire space fleet in the solar system of Earth were finally destroyed in 1230 AD. In addition to operatives of the Old Empire, who run the Earth prison operation, there were other beings from the Old Empire, who came to Earth. Since Earth was no longer under the control of the Old Empire, after their defeat by the domain forces, there was no police force to control military renegades, space pirates, miners, merchants and entrepreneurs who came to Earth to exploit the resources of the planet for personal gain, and many other nefarious reasons. For example, the history of Earth, according to the Jewish people, describes the Nephilim. Chapter 6 of the Book of Genesis describes the origin of the Nephilim, says, "Now it came about, when men began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, whomever they chose." The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. The ancient Jewish people who wrote the history book, called the Old Testament, were slaves, herders and gatherers. Any modern technology, even a simple flashlight, would seem astounding and miraculous to them. They attributed any unexplainable phenomenon or technology to the workings of a God. Unfortunately, this behavior is universal among all beings who have been given amnesia, and cannot remember their own experiences, training, technology, personality or identity. Obviously, if these were men, and they mated with Earth women, they were not sons of God. They were beings who inhabited biological bodies in order to take advantage of the political situation in the Old Empire, or simply to indulge in physical sensation. They set up small colonies of their own on Earth beyond the reach of the police and tax authorities. Coincidentally, one of the most serious crimes an could commit in the Old Empire was to violate income tax regulations. Income taxes were used as a slavery mechanism and as a punishment in the Old Empire. The slightest error in a tax report made an untouchable, followed by imprisonment on Earth. 6750 BCE. Other pyramid civilizations were set up by the Old Empire on Earth. These were established in Babylon, Egypt, China and Mesoamerica. The Mesopotamian area provided service facilities, communication stations, spaceports, and stone quarry operations for these false civilizations. Ptah was the name given to the first in a succession of administrators from the Old Empire, who represented themselves to the Earth population as divine rulers. Ptah's importance may be understood when one learns that the word Egypt is a Greek corruption of the phrase Het-Ka-Ptah, or House of the Spirit of Ptah. Ptah was nicknamed the Developer. He was a construction engineer. His high priest was given the title Great Leader of Craftsmen. Ptah was also the god of reincarnation in Egypt. He originated the opening of the mouth ceremony, which was performed by priests at funerals to release souls from their corpses. Of course, when the souls were released, they were captured, given amnesia, and returned to Earth again. The so-called divine rulers who followed Ptah on earth were called NTR, meaning guardians or watchers, by the Egyptians. Their symbol was the serpent, or dragon, which represented a secret priesthood of the Old Empire, called the Brothers of the Serpent. Old Empire engineers used cutting tools of highly concentrated light waves to quickly carve and excavate stone blocks. They also used force fields and spacecraft to lift and transport blocks of stone weighing hundreds or thousands of tons each. The placement on the ground of some of these structures will be found to have geodetic or astronomical significance relative to various stars in this galactic region. The buildings are crude and impractical, compared to building standards on most planets. As an engineer of the domain, I can attest that makeshift structures like these would never pass inspection on a planet in the domain. Stone blocks such as those used in the pyramid civilizations can still be seen, partially excavated, in the stone quarries in the Middle East and elsewhere. Most of the structures were hastily built, props, much like the false facades of a Western town on the set of a motion picture. They appear to be real, and to have some use or value. However, they have no value. They have no useful purpose. The pyramids and all of the other stone monuments erected by the Old Empire could be called mystery monuments. For what reason would anyone waste so many resources to construct so many useless buildings? To create a mysterious illusion. The fact of the matter is that each one of the divine rulers were bees who served as operatives of the Old Empire. They were certainly not divine, although they were bees. At 6248 before Christ, the beginning of active warfare between the domain space command and the surviving remnants of the Old Empire space fleet in this solar system that lasted nearly 7,500 years. It began when an installation was established in the Himalaya Mountains by a battalion of the 3,000 officers and crew members of the domain expeditionary force. The installation was not fortified as the domain was not aware that the Old Empire maintained Earth as a prison planet. The domain installation was attacked and destroyed by space forces of the Old Empire, who continued to operate in the solar system of Earth. BEs of the domain battalion were captured, taken to Mars, given amnesia, and sent back to Earth to inhabit human biological bodies. They are still on Earth, 5965 before Christ. Investigations into the disappearance of domain forces in this solar system led to the discovery of Old Empire bases on Mars and elsewhere. The domain took over the planet Venus as a defensive position against the space forces of the Old Empire. The domain expeditionary force also monitors life forms on Venus, which has a very dense, hot and heavy atmosphere of sulfuric acid clouds. There are a few life forms on Earth that can endure an atmospheric environment like Venus. The domain also established secret installations or space stations in the Earth's solar system. This solar system has a planet that is broken up, the asteroid belt. It provides a very useful low-gravity platform for takeoff and landing of spacecraft. It is used as a galactic jump between the Milky Way and adjoining galaxies. There aren't any planets at this end of the galaxy that can serve as a good galactic entering spot for incoming transport and other ships. But this broken-up planet makes a very ideal space station. As a result of our war against the Old Empire, this area of the solar system is now a valuable possession of the domain. From 3450 till 3100 before Christ. The intervention into the affairs on Earth by the Old Empire operatives or divine gods was disrupted at this time by the domain forces. They were forced to replace themselves with human rulers. The first dynasty of human pharaohs who united Upper and Lower Egypt began with the rule of a pharaoh who, coincidentally, was named Men. He established the capital city called Men-Nefer, the beauty of Men, in Egypt. This started the first succession of 10 human pharaohs and a period of 350 years of chaos that followed in the administrative ranks of the Old Empire. 3200 before Christ. As I mentioned earlier, Earth was under attack between the domain and the Old Empire forces during this period. Of course, this does not make any sense to archaeologists or historians on Earth, because the Egyptian period is a space opera era period. Since Earth historians have amnesia, they assume that this was only a religious period. Further, because the technology and civilizations installed on Earth during this period were pre-packaged, they did not evolve on Earth. Of course, there is no evidence anywhere on Earth of an evolutionary transition which resulted in sophisticated mathematics, language, writing, religion, architecture, cultural traditions in Egypt or any of the pyramid civilizations. These cultures, complete with all of the details of racial body types, hairstyles, facial makeup, rituals, moral codes and so forth, just appeared as complete integrated packages. The physical evidence suggests that all evidence of the intervention of the domain or old empire, forces, or any other extraterrestrial activity, has been carefully cleaned up, so as not to create suspicion. The old empire force does not want the bees of Earth to suspect that they have been captured, transplanted to Earth and brainwashed. So, Earth historians continue to assume that Egyptian priests were not supposed to have ray guns or other technology of the old empire. And they suppose that there was nothing going on Earth, except some priests walking around saying, Amen, which the Christians still say. At 3172 before Christ. Layout of the astronomical grid that joins the key mining sites and astronomical buildings of the gods, in the Andes Mountains such as Tiahuanaco, Cusco, Quito, the cities of Ollantaytambo, Macapicu, and Pachacamac for the mining of rare metals, including tin for use in making bronze. Metals were the property of the gods, of course. A great variety of entrepreneurial mining was done on Earth at that time due to the war between the old empire, force and the domain. These miners did carve a few sculptures of themselves. They are seen wearing mining helmets. The Ponce Stela sculpture in the sunken courtyard of the Kalasasaya temple is a crude rendering of a stoneworker using an electronic, light wave emitting stone cutter and carving tools, held in a holster. The old empire has also maintained mining operations on planets throughout the galaxy for a very long time. The mineral resources of Earth are now a property of the domain. At 2450 before Christ, the Great Pyramid and complex of pyramids near Cairo were completed. An inscription created by the Old Empire administrators can be seen in the so-called pyramid texts. The texts say that the pyramid was built under the direction of Thoth, son of Ptah. Of course there was never a king buried in the chamber, since the pyramids were never intended to be used as a burial chamber. The Great Pyramid was located precisely at the exact center of all of the land masses of Earth, as viewed from space. Obviously such precise measurements require aerial perspective and a view of the land masses of Earth from space. Purely mathematical calculations of the geodetic center of the continents of Earth could not be made otherwise. Shafts were constructed inside the pyramid to align with the configuration of stars in the constellation of Orion, Canis Majora, and specifically Sirius. The shafts are also aligned to the Big Dipper, where the home planet of the Old Empire existed. Also, Einitac, Alpha Draconis and Beta Ursa Minor. These stars are each one of the key systems in the Old Empire, from which SBEs were brought to Earth and dumped, as unwanted merchandise. The configuration of all the pyramids of the Giza plateau was intended to create a mirror image on Earth of the solar system and certain constellations within the Old Empire. At 2181 before Christ, Min, an Isbi, became the god of fertility of Egypt. The Isbi, also known as Pan, was also a Greek god. Min or Pan was an Isbi who somehow managed to escape from the Old Empire amnesia system. From 2160 till 2040 before Christ. One of the results of the intensifying battle between the domain forces and the Old Empire forces was that the control of the divine rulers was broken at this time. They finally left Egypt and returned to the heavens, so to speak, in defeat. Human beings took over the ruling role as pharaohs. The first human pharaoh moved the capital city of Egypt from Memphis to Heracleopolis, then from 1500 before Christ. This is the date for the destruction of Atlantis given by the Egyptian high priests, Xenophus of Heliopolis, and Sonkus of Say, to the Greek sage Solon. The priests of Anu recorded that the Mediterranean area was invaded by Atlantean people about this time. Of course, these people were not from the ancient continent of Atlanta, in the Atlantic Ocean, which existed more than 70,000 years earlier. These were refugees from the Minoan civilization on Crete, escaping from the volcanic eruption and tidal waves of Mount Thera that destroyed their civilization. Plato's references to Atlantis were borrowed from the writings of the Greek philosopher Solon, who was given the information by the Egyptian priest who called Atlantis, Keptu, which also happens to be the Egyptian name for the people of Crete. Some of the survivors of the Minoan volcanic disaster asked Egypt for help, since they were the only other civilization with high culture in the Mediterranean area at the time. From 1351 until 1337 before Christ, the Domain Expeditionary Force actively waged a war of religious conquest against the Egyptian mystery cult called the Priest of Amun, also known as the Old Empire, Brothers of the Serpent. During this time the pharaoh Akhenaten abolished the priesthood of Amun, and moved the capital of Egypt from Thebes to the new location at Amarna, at the exact geodetic center of Egypt. However, this plot to overthrow the Old Empire religious control was quickly spoiled. From 1193 before Christ, in the Near East and Achaea, the Greeks and Trojans fought for supremacy, which ended in the destruction of Troy as the finale of the Trojan War. During this same time, war was being fought out in the space of the solar system between two forces for control of the space stations surrounding Earth. That period of 300 years was a very violent resistance to the domain forces by the remnants of the Old Empire forces. It did not last long, however, as it is futile to resist the domain. From 850 years before Christ, Homer, the blind Greek poet, wrote the stories, the gods as borrowed and modified from earlier sources in Vedic texts, Sumerian texts, Babylonian and Egyptian mythology. His poems, as well as many other myths of the ancient world, are very accurate descriptions of the exploits of his bees on Earth who were able to avoid the Old Empire amnesia operation and operate without biological bodies. 700 years before Christ, the Vedic hymns were first translated in the Greek language. This was the beginning of a cultural revolution in Western civilization that transformed crude and brutal tribal cultures into democratic republics based on more reasonable conduct. From 638 until 559 years before Christ, Solon, a wise man from Greece, reported the existence of Atlantis. This was information he received from the Old Empire high priests, Xenophus of Heliopolis and Somchus of Say, with whom he studied in Egypt. 630 years before Christ, Zoroaster created religious practices in Persia around an Isbi called Ahura Mazda. This was yet another of the growing number of monotheistic gods put in place by operatives of the domain to displace a panoply of Old Empire gods. 604 years before Christ, Lao Tzu, a philosopher who wrote a small book called The Way, was an Isbi of great wisdom, who overcame the effects of the Old Empire amnesia, hypnosis machinery and escaped from Earth. His understanding of the nature of an Isbi must have been very good to accomplish this. According to the common legend, his last lifetime as a human was lived in a small village in China. He contemplated the essence of his own life. Like Gautama, Siddhartha, he confronted his own thoughts and past lives. In so doing, he recovered some of his own memory, ability and immortality. As an old man, he decided to leave the village and go to the forest to depart the body. The village gatekeeper stopped him and begged him to write down his personal philosophy before leaving. Here is a small piece of advice he gave about the way he rediscovered his own spirit. He who looks will not see it. He who listens will not hear it. He who gropes will not grasp it. The formless nonentity, the motionless source of motion. The infinite essence of the spirit is the source of life. Spirit is self. Walls form and support a room, yet the space between them is most important. A pot is formed of clay, yet the space formed therein is most useful. Action is caused by the force of nothing on something, just as the nothing of spirit is the source of all form. One suffers great afflictions because one has a body. Without a body, what afflictions could one suffer? When one cares more for the body than for his own spirit, one becomes the body and loses the way of the spirit. The self, the spirit, creates illusion. The delusion of man is that reality is not an illusion. One who creates illusions and makes them more real than reality, follows the path of the spirit and finds the way of heaven. 593 years before Christ. The Genesis story written by the Jewish people describe angels, or sons of God, mating with women of earth, who bore them children. These were probably renegades from the Old Empire. They may also have been space pirates or merchants from a system outside the galaxy who came to steal mineral resources, or smuggle drugs. The domain has observed that there are many visitors to Earth from neighboring planets and galaxies, but they rarely stop and live here. What kind of beings would live on a prison planet if they were not forced to do so? The same book also reports the story of a human named Ezekiel who witnessed a spacecraft or aircraft landing near Cheba River in Chaldea. His description of the craft uses very archaic language, technically, but is nevertheless quite an accurate description of an old empire, saucer or scout craft. It is similar to the sighting of Vimanas by the people in the foothills of the Himalayas. Their Genesis story also mentions that Yahweh designed biological bodies to live for 120 years on Earth. Biological bodies on most Sun-type 12, Class 7 inches planets are usually engineered to last for an average of about 150 years. Human bodies on Earth last only about one-half as long. We suspect this is because the prison administrators have altered the biological material of human bodies on Earth to die more frequently so that the bees who inhabit them will recycle through the amnesia mechanism more frequently. It should be noted that much of the Old Testament was written during the captivity of the Jews who were enslaved in Babylon, which was very heavily controlled by priests of the Old Empire. The book introduces a false sense of time and a false concept of the origin of the creation. The serpent is the symbol of the Old Empire. It appears in the beginning of their creation story, or as the Greeks say, Genesis, and causes the spiritual destruction of the first human beings, who are metaphorically represented by Adam and Eve. The Old Testament, clearly influenced by the Old Empire forces, gives a detailed description of the bees being induced into biological bodies on Earth. This book also describes many of the Old Empire brainwashing activities, including the installation of false memories, lies, superstitions, commands to forget, and all manner of tricks and traps designed to keep his bees on Earth. Most importantly, it destroys the awareness that humans are immortal spiritual beings. 580 years before Christ. The oracle at Delphi was one temple in a network of many oracle temples. Each temple was a communication center. The Old Empire priests designated a local god for each temple. Each of the temples in this network were located at precisely 5 degrees of latitude intervals from the capital city of Thebes throughout the Mediterranean area as far north as the Baltic Sea. The shrines served, among other things, as a grid, housing electronic beacons, later called omphalos stones. The grid arrangement of oracle sites can only be seen from miles above the Earth. The original network of electronic communications beacons were disabled when the priesthood was dispersed, and were replaced by carved stones. The symbol of the Old Empire priesthood is a python, dragon or serpent. It was called the Earth Dragon at Delphi, which is always represented in sculpture and vase paintings as a serpent. In Greek mythology, the guardian of the omphalos stone at the temple at Delphi was an oracle whose name was Python, the serpent. She was an Isbe, who was conquered by a god named Apollo. He buried her under the omphalos stone. This is a case of one god setting up his temple on the grave of another. This is a very accurate euphemism for the domain force that detected and disabled the Old Empire temple network on Earth. It was one of the fatal blows to the Old Empire force in the solar system of Earth, 559 years before Christ. The commanding officer of the Domain Battalion, who was lost in 5,965 years before Christ, was detected and located by a search party sent to Earth from the Domain Expeditionary Force. He was incarnated as Cyrus II of Persia during this time. A unique system of organization was used by Cyrus II and the members of that battalion who followed him from India through his progression of human lives on Earth. In part, it enabled them to build the largest empire in the history of the Earth to that date. The Domain search party who located him traveled around the Earth searching for the lost battalion for several thousand years. The party consisted of 900 officers of the Domain, divided into teams of 300 each. One team searched the land, another team searched the oceans, and the third team searched the space surrounding Earth. There are many reports made in various human civilizations concerning their activities, which humans did not understand, of course. The Domain search party devised a wide variety of electronic detection devices needed to track the electronic signature or wavelength of each of the missing members of the battalion. Some were used in space, others on land, and special devices were invented to detect bees underwater. One of these electronic detection devices is referred to as a tree of life. The device is literally a tool designed to detect the presence of life, which is an bee. This was a large electronic screen generator designed to permeate wide areas. To the ancient humans on Earth it resembled a sort of tree, since it consists of an interwoven lattice of electronic field generators and receivers. The electronic field detects the presence of ISBEs, whether the ISB is occupying a body, or if they are outside a body. A portable version of this detection device was carried by each of the members of the domain search party. Stone carvings in Sumeria show winged beings using pinecone-shaped instruments to scan the bodies of human beings. They are also shown carrying the power unit for the scanner, which are depicted as stylized baskets or water buckets, being carried by eagle-headed, winged beings. Members of the aerial unit of the domain search party, led by Ahura Mazda, were often called winged gods in human interpretations. Throughout the Persian civilization there are a great many stone relief carving that depict winged spacecraft, that they called a Faravaha. Members of the aquatic unit of the domain search party were called Oans by local humans. Stone carvings of the so-called Oans are shown wearing silver diving suits. They lived in the sea and appeared to the human population to be men dressed to look like fish. Some members of the Lost Battalion were found in the oceans inhabiting the bodies of dolphins or whales. On land, the domain search party members were referred to as Anunnaki by the Sumerians, and Nephilim in the Bible. Of course, their true mission and activities were never disclosed to Homo sapiens. Their activities have been purposefully disguised. Therefore, the human stories and legends about the Anunnaki and the other members of the domain search party have not been understood and were badly misinterpreted. In the absence of complete and accurate data, anyone observing a phenomenon will assume or hypothesize explanations in an attempt to make sense of the data. Therefore, although mythology and history may be based on factual events, they are likewise full of misunderstood and misinterpreted evaluations of the data, and embellished with assumptions, theories and hypotheses which are false. The space unit of the Domain Expeditionary Force are shown flying in a winged disc. This is an allusion to the spiritual power of the ISBEs, as well as to the spacecraft used by the Domain Search Party. The commander of the Lost Battalion, as Cyrus II, was an ISB who was regarded as a messiah on Earth by both the Jews and the Muslims. In less than 50 years he established a highly ethical and humanitarian philosophy which pervaded all of Western civilization. His territorial conquests, organization of people and monumental building projects were unprecedented before or since. Such sweeping accomplishments in a short period of time could only have been achieved by a leader and a team of trained officers, pilots, engineers and crew members of a unit of the domain, acting as a team, who had been trained and worked together for thousands of years. Although we have discovered the location of many of the ISBEs in the Lost Battalion, the domain has been unable to restore their memory and return them to active duty as yet. Of course we cannot transport ISBEs who are inhabiting biological bodies to the space stations of the domain since there is no oxygen in our spacecraft. Also we do not maintain life support facilities for biological entities there. Our only hope has been to locate and rekindle the awareness, memory and identity of the ISBEs of the Lost Battalion. One day they will be capable of rejoining us. 200 years before Christ. The last remnant of the Old Empire pyramid civilization is at Teotihuacan. The Aztec name means place of the gods, or where men were transformed into gods. Like the astronomical configuration of the Giza pyramids in Egypt, the entire complex is a precise scale model of the solar system that accurately reflects the orbital distances of the inner planets, the asteroid belt, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Since the planet Uranus had only been discovered with modern Earth telescopes in 1787, and Pluto not until 1930, it is apparent that the builders had information from other sources. A common element of the pyramid civilizations around the Earth is the constant use of the image of the snake, dragon, or serpent. This is because the beings who planted these civilizations here want to create an illusion that the gods are reptilian. This is also a part of an illusion designed to perpetuate amnesia. The beings who placed false civilizations on Earth, ISBEs, just like you. Many of the biological bodies inhabited by ISBEs in the Old Empire are very similar in appearance to the bodies on Earth. The gods are not reptiles, although they often behave like snakes. 1034 until 1124 years Anno Domini, the entire Arab world was enslaved by one man, Hassan ibn al-Sabah, the Old Man of the Mountain. He established the Hashashin who operated a part of Mohammedanism, which controlled by terror and fear much of India, Asia Minor and most of the Mediterranean basin. They became a priesthood that used an extremely effective mind control mechanism and extortion tool that enabled the assassins to control the civilized world for several hundred years. Their method was simple. Young men were kidnapped and knocked unconscious with hashish. They were taken to a garden filled with beautiful black-eyed houris in a harem decorated with rivers of milk and honey. The young men were told that they were in paradise. They were promised they could return and live there forever if they sacrificed themselves as an assassin of whomever they were commanded to kill. The men were knocked out again, and shoved out into the world to carry out the assassination mission. Meanwhile, the old man of the mountain sent a messenger to the caliph, or whatever wealthy ruler from whom they demanded payment, demanding camel loads of gold, spices, incense or other valuables. If payment did not arrive on time, the assassin would be sent to kill the offending party. There was virtually no defense against the unknown assailant who wanted nothing more than to carry out his mission, be killed and return to heaven. This is a very crude example of how simple and effective a brainwashing and mind control operation can be when it is used skillfully and forcefully. It is a small-scale demonstration of how the amnesia mind control operation is used against the entire ISB population of Earth by the Old Empire. 1119 years Anno Domini. The Knights Templar was established as a Christian military unit after the First Crusade, but quickly transformed into the basis for the international banking system to accumulate money to conduct the agenda of operatives for vestiges of the Old Empire on Earth. 1135 until 1230 years Anno Domini. The Domain Expeditionary Force completed the annihilation of the remaining remnants of the Old Empire space fleet operating in the solar system around Earth. Unfortunately, their long-established thought control operation remains largely intact. 1307 years Anno Domini. The Knights Templar was disbanded by King Philip IV of France, who was deeply in debt to the order. He pressured Pope Clement V to condemn the order's members, have them arrested, tortured them into giving false confessions, and burned them at the stake in an effort to erase his debt by seizing all of their wealth. A majority of the Templars fled to Switzerland, where they established an international banking system which secretly controls the economy of Earth. Old Empire operatives act as an unseen influence on international bankers. The banks are operated covertly as a combatant provocateur to covertly promote and finance weapons and warfare between the nations of Earth. Warfare is an internal mechanism of control over the inmate population. The purpose of the senseless genocide and carnage of wars financed by these international banks is to prevent the ISBEs of Earth from sharing open communication, cooperate together in activities that might enable ISBEs to prosper, become enlightened, and escape their imprisonment. Thank you for listening to Chapter 9 of the book Alien Interview. Based on personal notes and interview transcriptions provided by Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy. This book is dedicated to all immortal spiritual beings, whether they are aware of themselves as such, or not. What is true for you, is true for you. You are free to listening to the next chapter. The letters. Please subscribe Awareness Wisdom, we are grateful for that. Be aware in life. This audiobook about Alien Interview Chapter 9 * Top Secret * Information. The content of this book is primarily excerpted from the letter, interview transcripts and personal notes I received from the late Matilda O'Donnell MacElroy. In 1947, Roswell, New Mexico became the center of a mystery that changed everything. Initial reports of a crashed alien craft were quickly reversed, sparking conflicting accounts, global shockwaves, and a cover-up that may have hidden world-shattering truths about UFOs. Thank you for listening to Chapter 9, and be aware in life. Question everything.